Hi, and welcome to another episode of Talking Realty, the go-to podcast for home sellers looking to make more money, save time, and avoid headaches. Whether you're selling a flip, a new build, an income property, or the place you call home, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Glen Whitten, a 20-year broker and founder of the Ohio Property Group, where we're all about turning hands-on knowledge into seller success stories. No matter where you are, you should get our free monthly newsletter. This thing is jam-packed with strategies, tools, checklists, and tons of other seller resources, all designed to make you a better seller. Head over to talkingrealty.com to get your hands on all of it for free. And don't forget, subscribe right here to Talking Realty so you never miss a thing. Today's guest on the Talking Realty podcast is Andy Chom. Andy is a realtor who specializes in working with buyers. Buying a property is a bit different than selling a property, so buyers need someone who is well-versed in what we call the other side of the deal. Andy uses his training and experience to help buyers find the right properties and then gets them the best deal possible while helping them avoid problems along the way to closing. Now, I've known Andy for years, particularly the last few years since he married our own in-house marketing guru, Tasia. If you're keeping track, that would make him my son-in-law. And wisely, he hangs his license here with us at the Ohio Property Group, so we know him pretty well. While we spend the bulk of our time here talking about how to sell homes, savvy sellers know that you have to approach every sale from the buyer's perspective if you want to get the best results. Knowing how a buyer thinks and how they make decisions is critical to successfully selling any property. Basically, as a seller, you need to understand your customer. So, who better to talk to about what buyers are thinking than someone who works with buyers every single day? Andy and I are also going to talk about the recent NAR lawsuit settlement, which looks like it's going to bring some pretty interesting changes to the way people buy and sell homes. We will cover that in more detail today. So if you want to know what's in a buyer's mind and what's around the corner in today's real estate market, you won't want to miss today's episode. So without further ado, let's bring on buyer expert, Andy Chom. Andy, welcome to the podcast.
Glenn, great to be here. How are you doing today?
Honestly, Andy, I don't think I could be any better.
It's always a good thing.
So let's talk about buyer agents, Andy.
All right.
I talked a little bit about this during the introduction, just, kind of about what you do, but what our listeners don't know is your journey. So tell me a little bit about your journey. Tell me how it led to here and now and how you ended up selling real estate. Start wherever you like.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started out in college. I initially started out going to a pharmacy program, realized that that was not for me. So I switched over to pharmaceutical business and healthcare administration. I did that and I graduated with that degree in 2019. At the start of 2020, right before the whole world shut down, I got a job with a healthcare company. And it's certainly not been a bad job by any means, but like a lot of colleges, they tell you that you're going to be able to do your dream, but they don't tell you that there's a lot of work required to get there. They make it sound like you'll waltz into your perfect position right off the bat. I think a lot of people will find that's not the case. So while I've been working this job, I noticed my girlfriend, which led to my fiance and my wife, Tasia, they were working on this business. I watched as it grew, and I thought that there was a good opportunity there to expand it even further into the buyer side, because I see no reason for them to be able to do what they do with the sellers and to not be able to apply to the buyers, at least to some extent. So I got my license in 2021 and that led to the here and now.
So you saw this raging success going on over at the old Ohio Property Group and you wanted to get in on the fun, huh? Is that what I'm hearing? Okay.
Frankly, it was out of control and I felt it was unfair for them to keep all of the pie to themselves.
I gotcha. So you mentioned Tasia. How did you meet Tasia?
Her mother actually worked at the cafe at the school I went to, Ohio Northern. I would go into that cafe with my friend, and we're both very talkative people. It's one of our blessings. But we started talking with her. We hit it off. Eventually, we got on the subject of girlfriends or significant other. I didn't have one. She essentially set us up as a blind date without telling Tasia that it was one. So she kind of ambushed her with that. And thankfully, it went well. And then it's led to us being together for over 7 years. So This is one instance where mom actually knows best.
Mom does know best. So my wife, Tammy, has orchestrated a number of these situations. And so far, she's 100%. I'm just saying, everybody that she's got together has stayed together, and maybe she's onto something. She should probably open a side hustle or something. So,
I mean, it's a pretty good track record.
So here you are in real estate school. I've always heard that if you want to make it in this business, you have to be a listing agent. So why would you then come in and say, you know what, let's go the buyer side? What kind of drove you there, and Why buyers?
My wife and I, we purchased our first house in of 2021. Seeing that house, we went through a lot to get there. We spent essentially a year looking at different properties, basically all throughout Central Ohio, to try to find the house that we eventually landed in. The biggest blessing for us through that entire thing was having my brother-in-law, Justin, act as our real estate agent, because he was a very knowledgeable person, but it was also someone that we knew personally. So he wasn't going to try to pressure us into buying the first place we saw. He listened to us. He understood what we were looking for. And it was nice to have someone on our side as we went through this whole thing, because he was our family member. So he was actually there with us every step of the way. He wasn't just there to collect a paycheck at the end of the day. That really left an impression on me, because a lot of times what you'll see is that there are buyer agents who, if you have any pushback, then they won't be as interested. They might have you for 3, 6, 9 months, however long it may be, but they may not be as invested in you, just because they're invested in the paycheck. They're not invested in the journey it takes for you to get to where you need to be. And I think that it's a bit of a shame. It's a huge decision in your life. Purchasing a home isn't something that you do every day. And you want someone in your corner that's going to listen to you, that's going to take care of you and make sure that you end up where you want to be. So I just saw a huge opportunity for that. If I remember right, at one point in 2022, there were more realtors throughout the United States than there were properties for sale. It's mind boggling. And then you think about how many of those people got in it because it was an easy buck, or at least because they thought it was an easy buck. And then they realized that there's a lot more work involved than what they initially thought, and they ended up leaving. How many people ended up going with one of those realtors who ended up taking them through a couple places just so that way they could get their paycheck, as opposed to listening to them and helping them find the perfect property that they were really going to enjoy and cherish for years to come, versus a place in 2, 3 years you notice, there are a lot of flaws and you want to go somewhere else because it leaves a bitter taste in your.
So this process of working with Justin, who, again, for those of you who are keeping track, Justin is our son. And so this is truly an entirely family business. We say this is a family brokerage. Yeah. We're not kidding. So if you're not married or related, then we're probably not going to hire you. But anyway, so as you were going through this home purchasing process, it feels like, you needed a guide, you needed somebody to help you get from A to B, who was more looking out for you than themselves, is kind of what I'm hearing. Would that be fairly accurate?
Absolutely.
Okay. So you studied pharmacy, right? And this was the college painting your dreams with pharmacy. I mean,
yeah,
this doesn't sound like a bad
pharmaceutical
gig.
business.
So is there?
No, it not.
Was there any crossover from pharmacy to real estate, or not really? Did you kind of have to just sort of put that in the drawer and say, okay, next?
A lot of it you have to put in the drawer, but some of it actually does transfer. Not necessarily the exact scenarios, but the general ideas behind it. So, for example, in pharmacy, I work with providing prescription drugs to hospitals, to pharmacies, that sort of thing. So making sure that they're not purchasing too many controlled substances, making sure they're not running anything illicit on the side or doing illegal chargebacks, that sort of thing. I suppose similar lessons you can pull from that into real estate is that when you are acting as a buyer's agent, you can't talk with the seller. If there's a listing agent, but you have the seller's contact information for whatever reason, do not talk to them. You don't want to talk to them. You don't want to cross your sign with them. It will get you in a lot of trouble. So in a similar way, you just need to be very observant, all of your actions, and you need to make sure that you're taking mental notes every step of the way. So that way you can adhere to the law and not goof up even unintentionally, because an unintentional mistake is still a mistake.
You mentioned sign crossing. That's when one agent interacts significantly with another person who's represented by a different agent, and in particular, a different brokerage. That's kind of a no-no. But I guess it's one thing if we're talking about how's the weather, but once it starts to get into what would you take for this house, that's probably crossing that line. And that's what you're saying is you've got regulations and rules and ethics that you have to pay attention to, just like with pharmaceutical. You've got plenty of regulations there. So there's probably a little bit of that schooling that pays off so you don't get yourself in a big bunch of trouble. Since we kind of jumped into talking about the role of a buyer's agent, can you kind of break that down for me? What is a buyer's agent's job?
The fastest explanation of it, a buyer's agent represents their buyer throughout the entire process of that buyer purchasing a property. The buyer's agent will gather a list of properties that might match the criteria that the buyer is looking for, let them know about it. They will organize showings, walk them through properties. If one of those properties is the one the buyer wants, the buyer's agent will prepare an offer for them. The agent will collect all the necessary information from the buyer, such as the price they want to offer, if they want inspections, if there's an appraisal, if they're using a loan, or if they're paying with cash. They will take all of that information, they will prepare it on one of the board documents, and they will then submit it to the listing agent. The buyer's agent then negotiates with the listing agent, keeping the buyer in the loop the entire time, saying they're working with the listing agent, but they're keeping the buyer in their head. So that way they can get a deal together that works best with the buyer. Once that's done, both parties have signed. And at the very end, they'll get them to the closing table where they will sign, close, and move into their new property.
Okay. We work on the other side of that most of the time, but we certainly see this process unfold right in front of us. So how does it differ then in terms of, it sounds a lot like being a listing agent, except not really, because you're on the buyer side. So what are the key differences between like a buyer's agent's approach and maybe a listing agent like myself?
So the listing agent is going to want to get the absolute best price for the property. For their seller, they're going to want to get the best terms. So maybe no inspections, maybe they want cash, whatever it may be. The buyer's agent job, on the other hand, is to try to get the lowest price for the property that the seller will accept, as well as the best terms for their buyers. So that's really the main difference, is that the listing agent is in the seller's camp trying to get the best prices. The buyer's agent is in the buyer's camp trying to get the most acceptable price, is what I will say, because it's not necessarily the lowest price.
But at the end of the day, the goal is assuming it's a good deal for everybody to get it to the closing table. You mentioned making sure that the buyer gets the best deal. I mean, that might not necessarily align with what a seller's after. So for the sellers that are listening, is there any advantage to having a buyer with an agent such as yourself that specializes in buyer agency, or is this trouble for the seller?
There's definitely some advantages to a buyer having an agent when they're working with a seller. I think one of the main things is that buyer's agent can act as a buffer between the buyer and seller.
Right.
So buying and selling a home, both sides of it's a very emotional thing. And of course it's a huge decision, and it's potentially a place that the seller has lived in for years. You know, they've watched their family grow up in it. Maybe it was a generational house. There's a lot of strong feelings tied to that property. Similarly, when a buyer sees a place that they love, perhaps they've been doing this for a long time and they know that this is the property for them, they can get caught up in that as well.
Yeah.
Without having that buffer there, it's very easy for the buyer and seller to get overly emotional about it and potentially kill a deal over something that in the long term doesn't matter to either party. So one of the best benefits, I think, of having the buyer's agent is to act as that buffer to help prevent anything boiling over or anything like that. A buyer's agent is also there just to help get it to the closing table. The buyer's agent and the seller want the same thing. They want to see it close. So in a sense, they're working together on both sides, so that way they can actually get it to the end and they can get their house sold and get that money that they might need to purchase property.
Let's just say a seller doesn't have a listing agent. They're out here, they're a limited service in one of our packages, or they're for sale by owner. And a buyer comes along that's got Andy with them. But you're saying that you could potentially provide some benefits to that seller in terms of handling some paperwork, keeping the deal from becoming in this emotional crazy fest, which we know they can become very, very quickly. And then also just kind of bringing that expertise of knowing how a transaction works, how we get it from here to here to here to here, so that we all end up at the same place. You're not working for the seller, of course, you're working for the buyer, but the seller may get some, call it a halo effect of having you involved just because you do this for a living. Is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, excellent. I can tell you that there are a handful of my sellers that want absolutely nothing to do with a buyer that has an agent. Are there you feel like maybe you guys got a bad rap out there? Is there something maybe some myths you want to bust here, like about buyer agents that maybe you've heard or maybe you've encountered that you feel need to be debunked?
One of the main ones is that the buyer's agent is out to get you. They're out to nickel and dime you all the way down to the lowest possible price. So that way, when you get to the closing table, you're looking at that final statement going, where did all of the money go? That's not what a lot of buyer's agents are out there to do. Buyer's agents are looking to get a better price for their buyer, of course, but they're not looking to get every single penny that you possibly have back for them. And I think a lot of people get caught up in the fact that because buyer's agents are on the other team, so to speak, that it's very easy to see them as the enemy as opposed to seeing them as just another party involved in the transaction. And they want the same thing. Ultimately, they want to see it get to the closing table, which is why that a lot of them are willing to work with you to make it happen. There are, unfortunately, a few bad apples in the world, but that's the case with everywhere, where they will not necessarily work with you and not do the best to make things come together. But the vast majority of them will.
If I can interject here, we get this a lot on the sell side
Yeah.
because a lot of my listings sell to buyers that don't have a buyer's agent. They'll just come in an open house or whatever. They find the seller through some way, shape, or form, through marketing or however they contact us. We let our sellers show their own property. So we run into this misconception on the other side where a buyer might initially think, oh my gosh, this listing is just going to eat me alive. And nothing could be further from the truth because that doesn't help my seller. If I turn into a jackass and just try to press the buyer for every single thing I can get, that's not exactly going to help us get to the closing table, which is the ultimate goal. It's not just getting the most amount of money. It's getting the best deal for everybody all the way to the closing table. And that sometimes includes the buyer. I get that you can't advocate for a seller. You can't tell the seller, hey, my buyer will go up to this high. You can't divulge that sort of thing. But you can certainly bring a lot of benefits to the overall process. So I get what you're saying. So you're not all evil is what you're telling me.
No, we're not all evil. And believe it or not, we're all human too. I don't have a mechanical heart. It's very easy, going back to that emotional thing, for sellers to see the buyer's agent as that evil person, to see them as though they're whispering in the buyer's ear as the so-called devil on their shoulder. And a lot of times the seller will end up taking it out on that agent, when in reality, if I walk a buyer through a property, they tell me they don't want to do roofing repairs, for instance. We're walking through and we see that there are a number of broken shingles or missing shingles. I might not want them to do that because it looks as though there's going to be something deeper involved. That isn't necessarily me saying, hey, you don't want this place because look at all these problems. It's me pointing out potential issues that they have voiced. And unfortunately for the seller, it might mean it's one less offer coming in, but it didn't fit them in the first place.
Well, I mean, to stick with your roofing example, I mean, it's not like it's not going to come out anyway. It's going to come out in one of three places. It's going to come out before the offer. It's going to come out after the offer during inspections. Worse, much worse, because it's going to be more expensive. Or it's going to come out after closing. If it's something that should have been disclosed, then now we're talking about legal action. So I get what you're saying. You're not there to torpedo deals. You're there to match people. Now, if they come in and there's a professional roofer, obviously that's not a problem. Actually, that might even be an advantage because they can get something done that other people can't. So Absolutely. It's just about matching the property to the person and their wants and needs. So I see that.
Yep.
Okay. Hey, real quick. If I told you that you could make more money and dodge a whole bunch of headaches the next time you sell, you'd want in, right? Living to Listing is the online course if you want to become an expert at turning any property into the perfect listing. You'll learn how to eliminate countless problems so it sells faster and for more money. We've identified and solved the most common pitfalls that always seem to show up and cost you thousands of dollars or even kill the deal. And as we've learned, the best way to solve a problem is just to avoid it by prepping your home the right way. In Living to Listing, you'll get hands-on checklists and resources for each part of the process, along with short videos from yours truly, walking you through every step. And here's my promise. If this course doesn't meet your high standards, let me know and I'll refund you. You've got nothing to lose. Check out the free preview videos at livingtolisting.com. That's livingtolisting.com and see for yourself. Let me know what you think. So if we can change gears for a minute, there's been a lot of press about the lawsuits against realtors. And then just a few weeks ago, the National Association of Realtors is trying to settle the $1.6 billion or $8 billion verdict that's coming down. And they got it done for a relatively inexpensive price of $400 million, which is probably more money than Glen will ever see. But regardless, they're trying to stop it. So have there been some changes that will affect what you do or just the industry in general because of this settlement?
Yeah. So the first thing to note is that nothing has been finalized yet. So right now, at the time of this recording, the settlement was preliminarily agreed to. But of course, that could change before it gets to that finish line. So right now, nothing is firm. However, with the proposed changes, there would definitely be some difference. I think to be able to fully understand that, we need to look a little bit at how it's traditionally worked. So for the past 100 years or so, a seller would hire an agent and the seller would pay that agent 6% of their final home price at that closing, the listing agent would take that percentage and they would divvy it up. Half of it would go to them. The other half would go to the buyer's agent. Now, of course, that already leads to a little bit of a conflict of interest, because if you get a buyer without a buyer's agent, the listing agent will just get to keep all of that as opposed to splitting it in half. So a little bit of a conflict there. What this is proposing now is, instead of the seller paying both the listing agent and the buyer's agent, the seller would just pay the listing agent their commission. And then the buyer would pay the buyer's agent their own commission. So there would no longer be an interest in what the commission price is being paid from the seller to the buyer's agent. And it would allow the buyer themselves to have a lot more control over how much their agent is paid. If it was 6%, that buyer's agent will get 3%. It doesn't have to be that. If this goes through, you can pay your buyer's agent as much or as little as you would want, depending on how they perform and how you feel that they acted throughout the process.
So what you're telling me is that they're proposing that sellers no longer offer a buyer agent commission, or that the splits are going to change? I guess I'm looking for a clarification there.
Yeah, of course. So what they're proposing is known as decoupling. So the seller would just pay the amount to the listing agent. They would pay the commission only to them, but then the buyer's agent would have to negotiate directly with their buyer to determine what their commission amount would be going into the whole thing. In the past, if a buyer's agent would find a property for their buyer, they would be able to see on the MLS what percentage they would get paid if they brought them a deal that got all the way to close. With these proposed changes, buyer's agents would no longer be able to see that amount because sellers wouldn't be paying that amount to them. So they would need to negotiate directly with their buyer.
Got it. So everybody's paying their own fees. Does that mean the NAR is in the settlement is saying, hey, we're no longer going to allow listing agents like myself to post what, if anything, the seller is offering to buyer agent as a commission? We're no longer going to allow that to be posted in the MLS. Do you know why they did that? Why are they wanting to remove that information? Because it seems kind of like, why would you want to do that? If I'm a seller and I'm offering, 1%, 2%, 3% or $10,000 or whatever, I would want everybody to know that. So why is NAR willing to take away such a huge piece?
So a lot of it comes down to steering. For those who might not know, steering is the practice of directing a buyer to or away from a property based on characteristics other than what they might want. So in this instance, the steering would be a buyer's agent finds a property that checks every single box for their buyer, but it's only offering $100 in commission. The buyer's agent would probably not be happy with that, especially if they don't have prior commission payments arranged with their buyer. So instead of taking them to that property and saying, hey, it's only going to pay me $100. We will need to figure out how to make up the remainder. They will go, oh, I heard that this property had a pest infestation, or I heard that the electrical needs updated. Whatever they can think of that would steer their buyer away from that property. So that is the main concern with it. By taking away that commission amount or the ability for the agent to see that, it will actually allow competition in a marketplace that frankly has been oversaturated for far too long. These buyer agents are not going to be able to sit on their laurels and collect 3% while doing the bare minimum allowed.
Well, you're painting with a very broad brush, but I get what
Absolutely.
you're saying. One of the big topics a year or so ago when all this lawsuit stuff was happening was the MLS allows, still to this day, a buyer agent to set up a search for their buyers, and it will automatically send out listings as soon as they match. They will automatically go to their buyers. Well, the problem was that buyer agents were adding another piece of criteria, making sure that it offered a decent commission. Otherwise, they weren't going to send it. So to your point, not only were they not showing them, but if the buyer happened to find that property, they would be at a crossroads that would challenge their ethics. Do I show it and risk not getting paid, or do I find an excuse to keep them from wanting that house? And as we all know, buyers look for reasons not to buy. So it's not that hard to get in a buyer's head. And I don't think we're saying that wholesale, this is what agents were doing. I think the concern was that the possibility existed, and there may have been some people doing this. So NAR is just trying to knock it out. By cutting out the commission as a field in the MLS, they think that this will no longer be a problem. What do you think?
it's a good start. I think it will definitely help, but I do think that there might be some lingering problems from it. I know that there will be some buyer's agents who have been in the industry much longer than I have who will be against this because they feel that it would be unfair for them to perform a job without knowing what they're going to be paid beforehand. What a lot of them fail to take into account is that they can negotiate this beforehand and they can have their buyer sign an agreement stating that they will pay them X amount of dollars or a percent.
Well, let me stop you right there, because wasn't that part of the agreement is that every agent now, if they're working for a buyer, has to have a written agreement? Because as a listing agent, I would never take a listing without some agreement. Like, hey, I'm going to list your property for this many dollars and it's going to be for this long. And by the way, here's what I get paid. So everybody's on the same page. That transparency is one of the biggest problems in the industry. So for buyer agents, before this, you could sign them to an agreement, but you didn't have to. In fact, most people never do. Most buyer agents just buddy up and work and hope that they get paid a decent amount when it's over. You're saying that with these changes, they're going to formalize this, make it more mandatory.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. They will make it mandatory, and that will allow the agents to actually know exactly where they stand in terms of how much they're going to get paid and what their exact responsibilities towards that buyer is.
We call that a contract, I think, in the rest of the world. You know, what am
I
I getting and what am I giving? Okay, that's perfect. So if this happens, and we assume it will, I mean, unless there are major interruptions to the process, buyer agents will have to have this conversation of this is how much I make and this is what I'm going to do for it. That doesn't mean sellers can't offer a commission, right? They can still offer one.
Absolutely.
They just don't have to, right?
So they can either keep that amount of money for themselves, they can save that in closing costs, or they could bake that into their contract. That way they could drum up more interest from other buyer's agents. Now it might not be a percentage. They might say, hey, you'll get $5,000,
bonus,
$4,000. Yeah. And they'll bake that into their list price. So that way they know that amount of money is coming out. So if they want to list for $195,000, they might list it for $200,000. So that way that $5,000 is already set aside for the buyer's agent when they get to the closing table. So they're still ending up where they want to be.
Andy, you and I talk offline quite a bit, being that we're family. So we already know the crazy part of this is that nothing is new here. Because
none of this is revolutionary.
What people fail to understand, and it's probably one of the main reasons why realtors are getting sued, is because they like to tell these rumors and they love it when these rumors become urban myth or fact in many people's minds, is that sellers never had to offer that commission, did they?
No, they did not.
It's always been optional. We opened our doors at the Ohio Property Group as a flat fee company in 2003. And from day one, our sellers had the option of whether or not to offer a buyer agent commission. And if so, what to offer. They could offer $1, they could offer $1 million. It made me no difference because my job didn't change. My job was to represent the seller from beginning to end throughout that transaction. If the buyer had an agent or didn't have an agent, it didn't really change my playbook. This is becoming such a big deal, but I would say the real benefit, and stop me if I get off track here, but the real benefit is that what's truth, which is sellers never really had to offer a buyer agent commission, is now becoming more widespread. People are starting to understand us for the first time because it's getting a lot of national media.
Yes. People are actually seeing the full picture of it. Whereas before they were given an idea, but a lot of these things weren't made explicitly clear to them with full understanding and intent.
Right. I've been on record many times as saying that the real estate process is far more complicated than it needs to be. And I think a lot of that complication is on purpose. And I'm sure there's a big fancy college word for it, but regardless, there's a smokescreen up and a lot of agents kind of like it like that. They like this to be a little bit mystical and scary because it makes clients less apt to challenge the status quo. It's never been a really problem here, but let's fast forward to talk about how you're doing business. I mean, what would you say as a seller? Should they offer a commission or not? If your neighbor was getting ready to sell, what would you tell them?
I would probably tell them that they could offer a commission amount baked into that list price. I certainly wouldn't make it a percentage just because there's a lot more variance there. I would maybe make it a set dollar amount that they will say that will still be a fair price to that buyer's agent without necessarily handing over the farm to them. So that way they could still drum up attention from enough buyer's agents. Because like I mentioned earlier, there's going to be a number of agents who are against this just because they want to be able to have their cake and eat it too. They don't like the idea of making a lower commission amount when they've been making whatever percentage they have been for so many years. course, change is a scary thing to all of us, but this is a change that isn't going away. And the sooner that the buyer agents embrace it, the better it's going to be for the entire industry as a whole.
Agreed. We've heard rumors this is the death of the buyer's agent and all this stuff, and I don't think that's true. Buyers, I would say at least half, won't even go look at a house until they've engaged the services of a buyer agent. They're that nervous about the process. Now, some of them, when buyers start paying buyer agents, that number could certainly drop. But I still think there's a huge percentage of buyers out there that are too afraid because of all the things you said in the beginning. It's the biggest purchase of their life. They only do it a couple times a year. There's about a million things that can go wrong. And oh, by the way, the seller probably has an agent in their corner. So it might behoove them to have an agent in their corner, at least to level the playing field, unless they're really experienced. So the world without a buyer's agent, I just don't feel like that's reality. Hopefully I'm right, if nothing else for Andy's sake. But
yeah.
So you've got a little bit different spin on this, though. You work differently from a lot of other buyer agents. Can you break that down for me? Just sort of what's different about working with Andy versus all these other buyer agents?
I'd be happy to break it down for you. When I started this program, I modeled it a lot after yours. I looked at what you were doing and mirrored it into a buyer agent's perspective. So what I offer is a flat rate amount that costs $2,000, and I will do all the exact same things for a buyer. The only exception being showing properties. Now that's something that I can still do, but it would change the amount paid just because there will be more work involved. The way I see it, pretty much anyone can walk through a house. If you're a first-time buyer, you might like having an agent walk through with you to tell you some of the different features and that sort of thing. But the vast majority of people, they're going to be able to discern what a kitchen is from a bathroom. At least I hope so. A lot of people, as soon as they step into a house, they know what they're looking for. They might step in and immediately say, no, this isn't right. Tasia and I both had that experience many times where we would open the door, take 2 steps, realize this isn't the right property for us. It's not necessarily something you can explain. It's just something that you have as a gut feeling and you walk out. So buyers know what they want a lot of the times coming into this. They don't necessarily need someone to walk them around and tell them about all the fun facts and features. They need someone to tell them about any possible repairs that they have done that's been disclosed in the residential property disclosure. They're going to need an agent to help them fill out all of the paperwork because they probably have never seen those documents before. And while they can definitely read through it and get an understanding of it, and I encourage everyone to, it might not be something that they have a complete grasp of and are comfortable doing. Mm-hmm. And then they have a buyer's agent to help them negotiate with the seller or the listing agent and get them through all of those hurdles to closing. So I charge a flat fee to do all of those things that a buyer's agent would do, because no matter what you're buying, that process doesn't change. I will still be in your corner. I will still be negotiating for you and helping you get through those main hurdles. So why should I be paid 3% of $1 million property versus 3% of a $50,000 property?
Yeah.
I don't think there's any reason to, because I'm providing the exact same skills and service for both.
Yeah, and we say this on the listing side as well, that it doesn't cost any more to sell an expensive home than a starter home. In fact, we can usually make the argument that the starter home is probably a lot more work in some cases. So what I'm hearing is that you're going to allow the buyers to do some of the stuff, meaning the drive-by and going to look at it, go to open houses, or maybe even setting up a walkthrough after it's under contract, something like that you would arrange. But you're going to focus in on the stuff that you're good at, the stuff that you're an expert at, which is the paperwork and the process and troubleshooting and helping them with comps and helping them with the financing part of things. Did I get that right?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there.
Okay. And so for that set of fees, this should sound familiar to my regular sellers. For that set of fees, you charge a set price, right?
Yes,
Very
I do.
good. And just like we do, you have options that could change that price. If they want you to do things that are outside of the scope of what you're doing for the flat fee, then you guys could discuss and arrange a different commission or a different fee, correct? So it's not like you're just saying, nope, I don't do that. Get lost.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, good enough. So in your model, you're charging this flat rate, which is a departure from what most buyer agents do. Most buyer agents pretty much just take whatever the seller's offering, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So in this case, it wouldn't matter what they were buying. It wouldn't matter if it was listed or if it was for sale by owner or whatever. Your fee is your fee, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what if the seller is offering not $2,000? What if they're offering nothing? How does that work?
The way that would work is we would already have an agreement in place with that buyer. They already know the amount that I would charge for my services. They would be able to put that as a line item on their closing statement. So that way it would come out of their entire mortgage amount. So instead of them having to pull out their wallet and write a check for $2,000, they would just be able to roll it into their final statement for their property purchase.
Okay. So in other words, they could make it like a concession in the deal that your fee would get paid at closing. So they wouldn't necessarily have to out of pocket. They certainly could out of pocket it, especially if they're a cash buyer.
Sure.
Okay. So I get all that. Well, what if the seller's offering more than $2,000? Is that just a good day for Andy, or what happens there?
No, that commission amount wouldn't change. So there are a couple options that would be presented to the buyer in that instance if it's more. The first one would be to just credit all of that back. So that would help with all of their closing costs. That would put more money in their pocket, probably make them happier. The other option would be to take whatever the difference is as a credit at closing. So they would potentially get a couple $1,000s off their final purchase price. That money saved could then be used to help them move in or hire whoever they might need and help them out with that. But in either case, I wouldn't be seeing any overages from it. It would just go back to the buyer, depending on what the buyer would like to do.
So you would just negotiate the deal and then say, by the way, the seller's offering $3,000 more than what my fee is. So do you want me to take that off the price? Or, so you the buyer are paying less, or do you want me to just have that set up as a credit back to you at closing on the buyer? Okay. Sorry, I didn't want to get too deep in the weeds there, but that's
No, you're good.
That's fascinating stuff. So you feel like this is where things are headed with all the changes that are happening with NAR, and buyers are going to have to be having these conversations with agents and vice versa. So are you just ahead of it, or what do you think as far as where the industry is going to take this?
Yeah. I think I'm a bit ahead of the curve, at least in all of my research. I haven't seen anyone necessarily offering something like this before. Certainly doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I think assuming the settlement goes through and everything falls where we expect it to, that we're going to be seeing more of this in the future. Buyers and sellers are going to be able to fully understand the value that a buyer's agent brings to the transaction, and they're going to be able to negotiate appropriately. There's going to be that full transparency that everyone really, truly wants. And I think buyers are going to have a much better understanding of what they need someone to help with versus what they can do by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I see this potentially taking off within the next 5 years or so, just as the industry shifts and changes. And a lot of agents are going to have to adapt to a different model to keep up.
Well, when I mentioned 21 years ago, it was so different and so out of the blue. Frankly, sellers, even to this day, I still get the comment, is this a scam? Are you, over in some Eastern Bloc country in somebody's basement, cranking out no, this is just the model we chose. And I think that's what you're doing. You're just choosing a model that's, one, it's different, and two, it's, dare I say, common sense, because you're right, that doesn't cost more to help somebody buy an expensive property than it does to help them buy a lot. It's the same amount of time, roughly. It's the same amount of energy, same amount of expertise. So you're not going to have a hard time convincing me that a flat fee commission is the way to go. So if I'm a seller and it seems like we've now kind of rolled up why it might be attractive to have one of their buyers have a buyer's agent, first of all, and then also to have a buyer's agent that has already ironed out the fee. This looks like it could remove some barriers to the traditional deal. Have you ever seen a deal come apart by an amount less than the commission? It's
absolutely.
We're down to $500 that we're trying to fight over, and the deal dies, but the commission's sitting out here at $10,000, $12,000, $15,000. Doesn't that just drive you crazy, Andy?
Yes, it does, because it's such a small number and no one ever brings that commission amount because they want to keep that off to the side. That's the final negotiating chip.
Look, the taxes a lot of times are more than what the deal falls apart over. It's crazy to me. And nobody argues about the property taxes. They just accept it, that's just how it is. We got to pay the property taxes. We got to pay the transfer tax. We have to pay the title fee. We have to pay the title insurance. We understand, and everybody seems to just sort of accept. And I feel like you're headed down a road that could be very trend setting, first of all, and second of all, could be extremely attractive to both buyers and sellers, because it's an upfront type fixed cost. I don't mean it's an upfront cost. I mean, it's out in front. Nobody's hiding behind this. I feel like you're going to open a lot of doors. So any updates as far as when all this is going to happen? Do we know when we're going to know whether or not this is the new regime, or does that even matter to you?
honestly doesn't matter to me because it's not going to change how I do business. I think that they're going to settle something in the summer of 2024, but it's not going to affect how I do day to day because I've got ahead of those changes.
Good for you. And good for your buyers as well, because I imagine it's probably pretty scary out there for buyers right now thinking, do I want to go it alone or do I want to pay some crazy number to an agent and not really even understanding what that agent's bringing to the table? Are there any parting words, any advice to sellers, to buyers that you want to impart?
For sellers working to buyers, all I would say is keep in mind that everyone has the same goal. At the end of the day, we all want the exact same thing, and they're people too. They're not looking to get the absolute lowest price for you. A lot of times they're willing to work directly with you. So that way your property will be taken care of for years to come. And you'll know that that buyer is going to love it just as much as you did. Just keep in mind that everyone is human in this, keep that love high. It's going to take you very far.
Excellent. Are you taking new clients?
Yeah, I'm taking new clients. If nothing else, I'm happy to point them in the right direction if this isn't the proper fit for them. And if it is, I am more than happy to help them through the process.
So how would someone get started with that process? Is there a place they should go?
Yes, there is. I would appreciate it if you put the link in your description, but the
will.
website is ohiomlsflatfee.com/buyers. If you mention that you came across this through the podcast, you will get a free checklist that I've created. It's the 10 things that I think every buyer should have before ever setting foot in an open house.
Yeah, we'll definitely link to that in the show notes and make sure that people have access to that. So outside of this or inside of real estate, are there any other current projects you're working on?
If we look outside of real estate, I like to tinker around on things in my free time just because that's who I am. I grew up in a family of machinists who weren't afraid to teach me how to use my hands. So I've got a couple things going on right now. I have a saxophone that I'm currently restoring in my spare time. So I play saxophone. I should probably mention that's why I'm doing it in the first place. It's not just a random thing that I've chosen. I also have a pair of speakers that I'm currently working on rewiring as well. It's very, very slow and tedious work, but it'll be rewarding.
Let me ask you, what is this free time you speak of?
Well, it's few and far between, but whenever you get it, you try to enjoy it the best you can.
Amen to that. All right. Well, so if people want to connect with you, they should go to that page, or do you want to send them somewhere else, the socials?
Yeah, they could go to that page or they could shoot me an email. It's Andy@ohiomlsflatfee.com. Those are the best ways to get in touch with me.
We'll also link to that information. Andy, I can't thank you enough for your time today, and I know that we all learned a little bit today. So thank you, and I hope you have a great day.
Thanks. I hope you too, Glenn.
Huge thanks to Andy for sharing so much about buyer agency. I know my IQ went up a couple of points. Before we go, just a reminder that the Talking Realty podcast is brought to you by the Ohio Property Group, a family-owned brokerage. Most home sellers hate paying huge commissions to realtors. At the Ohio Property Group, we do all the same things as other realtors, but instead of charging 6%, we charge a low, flat fee to sell your home. So our sellers save thousands of dollars and get better results. If today's conversation sparked a new idea or answered a burning question, please don't keep it to yourself. Share this episode with your friends and family who might benefit from it. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to Talking Realty so you never miss a thing. By the way, if you have any questions or topics you'd like to hear us cover in the future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. Just head to talkingrealty.com and say hi. Thanks again for tuning in. Until next time, keep making smart moves in your real estate journey. This is Glen Whitten signing off from Talking Realty. And remember, you can sell it. We can help.